Yeah, thanks for asking about the border trip. I was happy to travel with 5 other colleagues down to the border. Started with a press briefing with the U.S. Border Patrol. You know, those numbers are startling. We've obviously seen a great increase of border crossings. That includes unaccompanied minors, as well as families, and just in general, it's really taken off. And you know, you can pinpoint it to the presidential election when you started to see that take off. As well, under the Trump administration, they did have a rule which it was called the Stay in Mexico. So you had to stay in Mexico until you could get, you know, the proper hearing and so forth. And so this has had a big influx. When that rule was removed, we've had an influx. So started with that briefing, looking at that, and then we went to just outside of Carrizo Springs. It's a center where they bring unaccompanied minors. This particular center was 13 to 17-year-old boys, and it was at capacity at 700. You know, you have to think about the different countries that they've come from, Guatemala, even Haiti, in thinking about these young people traveling and traversing that far. You have to worry, for me as a lawmaker and as a mother, the impact that has had on their life. Were they safe during that time? And so the great concerns. The United States is a very benevolent nation. They're getting 3 square meals a day. They typically stay there for about 10 days, sometimes a little bit longer. So, you know, it was good to tour the facility. We wanted to go to the Donna detention, or where they first enter, but we were denied by the federal government. I don't think they would have let any media in, and no lawmakers. So that's a bit concerning that you can't get into that. But was very pleased that the center that's run by a nonprofit allowed us to, I think it's the Baptist Family nonprofit, that allowed us to go in and view the facility. And again, it's a former man camp for the oil field. It's been retrofit to allow these different dormitories and big tents to be put up. So startling, concerning. I think when we all left there was a somber mood about the depth of the issue. Again, you know, you have to think about children traveling by themselves, and that's 13 to 17-year-old, but they also have female centers like that, and they also have for younger children. So very concerning. I think that there is this, you know, thought that if you just get there, you can get in, which is true right now. And, you know, the messaging back to the other countries needs to be that this isn't just an open border, because again, what you do to those children along the way. And what we're doing is we're enriching a lot of human traffickers. They're trafficking these people. I don't know what happens to them, but finally they get to the United States. And again, the center is doing a very good job with the children, but it's a very concerning situation. Well, we have made substantial investments. Last session, $1.3 billion, and the U.S. Border Patrol thanked us over and over again on the investment, because we are assistants. But as you know, the Constitution does not allow states to enforce border laws, and so we have to work with our federal partners. Again, there has to be messaging back to those countries that this is not an open border. We have to change the policies. I think the Stay in Mexico policy is a strong policy. Then that has Mexico actually working with us, because most of them traverse through Mexico to get to the United States. So there's a lot of things that we need to do as a government, and we need to decide if we're a sovereign country with borders or not. And that's a federal decision, but Texas at this pace, we will have, at this pace currently, somewhere between 2 and 4 million people cross the Texas border. That is a startling number.
And that has an impact on the state of Texas, regardless of if it's a federal issue. So I guess to follow up on that, what more can Texas do aside from a financial investment to address this?
Yeah, one of the things that we did do when the cartels were moving so many people over here, we lined up our black and whites, next to each other and showed a force. And we may have to do that at one point to show that we are not going to allow the cartels and others just to move in and take over the southern border. I know that I'm hearing from people down there saying, help us, we're being overrun. So this is not a Democrat or a Republican thing right now. If, when I was sitting there in the briefing, there was a local newspaper, and one local citizen had held 4 people at gunpoint, like holding them there because they were breaking into their house. These are real stories with real problems.
I want to ask you about the latest on the pandemic response right now. A lot of the conversations we've been having are what are the lessons learned? How do we look back, but also look forward? We could face another pandemic with another kind of virus anytime, right? What did we learn with this pandemic that we're in, and what are you pushing for to ensure, as chair of Health and Human Services, to make sure that we're better prepared for the next one?
Yeah, and Senate Bill 25 that I passed off the Senate floor, one of the very first bills that passed the Senate is the essential caregiver bill that is going to allow families to appoint an essential caregiver so that we never ever lock away our elderly or our most fragile. That includes some of our IDD population, ever again. So that was my first start. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to also pass some bills, hopefully with the help of my colleagues, that give some checks and balances to input from the legislative body, because many times we are the closest people to the district, right? We're in our districts, we know what the people are saying. I, for one, believe that the lockdowns were not the wisest thing that we've ever done. We've seen such mental health issues from it. The medical world tells me that, the long term, 5-10 years from now, we may see many more deaths from missing screening for cancer and long-term effects of lockdowns. So hopefully we've learned that we're not going to be doing that in the future, and that we can mitigate these viruses in other ways. Plus, I want to say that the research and development on the work that we've done on SARS-CoV-2 with the vaccine and the therapeutics are going to pay large dividends, and I mean health dividends, in the future, because the original SARS and the original MERS were so lethal that they killed their host, so it never became a pandemic, really. And this one was not nearly as lethal as we're going to eventually see, but it was very contagious. And so we never completed our research back then because it played out. This time it forced us to really do great research that will be ongoing for years to come.
Taking sort of a big picture approach to looking at all of these different issues, I mean, I know we only have 140 days plus to tackle all of this. There are all kinds of other things, with the electric utility concerns that have now come up, voting bills, police brutality, all these other issues. What needs to be done on the COVID front so that COVID-19 doesn't find itself on the back burner?
It's a great question. So you come into this session and you think COVID's going to be the main driver, but then you had the winter storm Uri, you had the ERCOT PUC breakdown of the grid, and so it really has kind of taken second seat. But lawmakers like me are pushing forward with our bills. And each session, because we only meet every two years, has multiple issues, and certainly people are more comfortable now that we have the vaccines moving. I want to say publicly, of course, everyone over the age of 18 is eligible. I think one vaccine you can go to 16, but now we've opened it up on EVAP, one of the committees that I serve on, the expert vaccine allocation panel, and our distribution channels are opening up. Still a little bit of a backlog as we open it up to everyone, but everyone be patient. There's a new study that just came out I think it's UT Health in Houston, that says that the antibodies are probably present in 25% of the people already. Then you add the vaccines to that. So obviously we're much farther than we were just 2, 3, 4 months ago.
On social justice, I know I mentioned that there are some other pieces of legislation, but what's your expectation on the Senate or the legislature as a whole passing something on social justice, whether that's a law enforcement perspective or something along the lines of this George Floyd Act that's being talked about?
I think that the committee process will work on both the House and the Senate, and eventually we'll see some bills. I'm a big supporter of the, certainly fairness, but I think that our police officers and law enforcement officers have been unfairly targeted through this discussion. And there's obviously always good discussions to have, but the Texas Senate and the Texas House of Representatives do a really good job of vetting bills and making good decisions, and I think we have to let the process work. Yeah, time's running a little short because COVID, we had a different session, but I'm extremely pleased to start to see people in our hallways and people testifying on bills and the process working again. And what really worried me coming into session was limiting the public's voice. But I'm starting to see that voice appear in the hallways and in our committee rooms and in my office, and I'm very pleased about that. So I feel good about where Texas is. I think we're blessed to live in Texas, and to be able to have this opportunity to set the priorities for our next 2 years, and that starts with the budget, and you'll see a budget coming out of the Texas Senate very soon.
While I have you here, I want to ask you about the election legislation as well that's in committee right now in the Senate. Lots of conversations about election integrity happening across the state, but from your perspective, what do we need to do as a state to make sure that there is public confidence in our election system?
We need to do exactly that there's confidence in the election system. And so we need to root out any mailer fraud, the mail-in ballot fraud, if there is any. We need to get back down to the very bottom of that. We saw that in other states where they weren't matching up signatures, where there were stories of multiple ballots being sent by one person. We need to be extremely careful about how we go about passing laws for voter integrity. We also need to make sure on our electronic voting systems that we have a paper ballot, and we need to make sure that none of those voting systems need to be hooked up to the internet. That's ridiculous. And we also then need to make sure that each voting machine is thoroughly investigated and is properly maintained before the vote counts. If you cannot have confidence in your voting systems, then you have a breakdown of the republic and you have a breakdown of democracy. And so it's incumbent upon all of us. And when certain bills are passed, it's looked at voter suppression, when it's actually the opposite. It's making sure that the voter, that voter's ballot counts and is not canceled out by others that might want to have fraudulent voting. So this is a very careful balancing act to make sure that people can vote, but there's a responsibility to vote. You have to, you have to show that action. You can't just, somebody can't just come to your door. You can't just sit on your computer and vote. You have to go cast that ballot for voter integrity. And if you're allowed to vote through the mail, we have to make sure that we have the proper checks and balances, that it's a one person, one vote system. Well, we're working on, I'm always big on eminent domain. I'm hoping that something passes that is a fairness to the landowners and make sure that, when government can take your land or a private company can take your land, that's huge authority. So I'm working on the balance of that, as well as the insulin bill that I just passed today, which is caps the copay, the out-of-pocket expenses at $50 for people. that is so important. Insulin with type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes is life and death. And so we're working on some things that we hope can make Texas healthier and to help the landowner with that eminent domain issue. And then, of course, public education and higher education is always in our forefront. I thought a senator said it best in the bill laying out today, that the most important thing we probably do in this building is to make sure that our children are educated. So there's a lot of big issues, compressed time, and this session is certainly more compressed than others because of COVID-19 and then some of the big issues that came up since February.